Okay, today what we're going to talk about is surface area and volume. We want to make sure that we understand both of these concepts so we can be able to not only determine the surface area and volume of figures, but then be able to read word problems and figure out what we're supposed to do in order to determine that. So first of all, we need to understand what is a rectangular prism. A rectangular prism can be a cereal box. We saw those in class today. It could be a gift box. It could be a television. See, it's a thin rectangular prism. It can be a locker. So what we have is when we look at a rectangular prism, it has 3 dimensions. So we're going from our 2-dimensional figures, which are our squares and our triangles, and we're moving on to 3-dimensional figures, which have 3 dimensions to it. That's why we call it 3D: length, width, and height. So then the question is, what's a cylinder? A cylinder can be your soup can. It can be a toilet paper roll. It could also be a Pringles container. I know you're probably sitting there thinking, I'm hungry now. So when we talk about our cylinder, there's 2 main areas of measurement that we need to consider, and that's the radius and the height. You've talked about circles before in the past, where a circle does have a radius. Its radius is half of the diameter. And so we can again say a cylinder is made up of 2 circles, one on the top, one on the bottom, and 1 rectangle. And you might be sitting there thinking, I don't see a rectangle, but we'll talk about that in a second. So surface area. The surface area is the sum of all of the areas of all of the shapes that make up the object. We go ahead and say, because we're talking about area, we're saying it's square units. All right, it says units squared, not units 2, units squared. So let's talk about the label on a can. All right, we're talking about, or the wrapping paper on a box, or the amount of material needed to make a can or box. That's what surface area is. These 3 things that you see that circled around and came up here at the bottom, those are important for you to be able to understand, because when we get to our word problems, we're probably going to need to know what that is when we're reading a word problem so we know what to do. So surface area of a rectangular prism, it says, what information do you need to find the surface area of side A? So we would have to say the length and the width. All right, so we need that. How many sides of A are there? Well, there's a top, but there's also a bottom. So we're going to go ahead and say 2 times the length times the width. Since we have a side A on the top of this rectangular prism and also on the bottom of this rectangular prism, we would say 2 times length times width. Then we need to know what information do we need about side B. So that would be our length and our height to figure out the area of side B. And how many, and there's a front and a back to this box, so we would say that there's 2 side B's, so we would say 2 times length times height. And then we have side C, and we're going to need our width and our height to figure out the side C. So how many side C's are there? There's a right side, which is side C labeled, and the left side that we don't necessarily see. So we say that there's 2 sides to that as well. So we say 2 times width times height. So if we put it all together, our surface area is 2 times length times width. That was our side A and the back, plus 2 times length times height, plus 2 times width times height. So here we want to go ahead and solve it. In order to solve it, we're just going to plug in all the numbers, multiply, and then add it up. Again, we have to follow those order of operations. Plug it in, multiply, and add. And then our answer is in square units. So let's go ahead and try this one together. First of all, when we look at this rectangular prism, the very first thing I want you to do is label your length, width, and height. Now, for me, it does not matter how you label it. because this rectangular prism could stand up on its side and the length, width, and height you might feel as though it's different. But in this case, I'm going to say this is my length, this is my width, this is my height. All right, so now that I know what L, W, and H are, so L is 15, W is 5, H is 10. I have 2 LW. Remember, when numbers and letters are side by side, that means multiply. So I'm going to say 2 times 15 times 5 plus, there, bring down my 2, and now I have L and H. So times 15 times 10 plus 2, and now my W and H, times 5 times 10. So now it's just a matter of going through and doing the math. So we say 2 times 15 is 30. 30 times 5 is 150. You most definitely want to have a calculator for these type of problems, whether you use just a simple calculator at home, use a calculator in the school, or a calculator on your phone. You want to be able to use a calculator so we get this right. We have to follow the order of operations with this. So I'm multiplying, bringing down my plus sign. 2 times 15 is 30, times 10 is 300. Bring down my plus sign. 2 times 5 is 10. 10 times 10 is 100. And so now it's just a matter of adding it all up. And we end up with 550. It was centimeters. That's our units. So I'll say centimeters squared. 550 centimeters squared. And I want to circle my answer. A couple things I want you to note in what I did. I showed all of my work. Okay, with this, if you can't show me where the numbers go in the formula, you will not get credit for this problem, I promise you. Moving on. What I want you to do is try this one on your own. We'll talk about it in class. Pause the video if you need to. I'm moving on to surface area of a cylinder. Surface area of a cylinder, the formula for the area of a circle is pi r squared. How many circles are there? There's 2. And the formula is going to be 2 times pi r squared. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this rectangle. All right, so part of the rectangle is the height of that cylinder. The other part of that rectangle is the length, okay? We know length times height or length times width. But the length is actually the circumference around the circle. So I'm going to go ahead and say 2 pi r. All right, so the circumference of the circle is 2 pi r, and I'm going to multiply that by the height. So I get 2 pi r h. So to put it all together, the surface area of a cylinder is 2 pi r h plus 2 pi r squared. So in order to solve, plug it in, multiply, and add it up. Use 3.14 for pi. Do not use the pi button on your calculator. You will not get it right. The state uses 3.14. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug the numbers in. I need a calculator for this because I'm dealing with decimals, so you most certainly would too. 2 times 3.14. I am following exactly what my formula is telling me to say. Then I'm going to say times r, my radius. I probably should have labeled my radius and 22 as my height. That way I know. Times my radius of 8 times my height of 22 plus 2 times 3.14 times my radius, which is 8, squared. All right, so let's go ahead and plug these numbers in. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick little step here. So so I can keep going, I'm going to go ahead under this 8 squared. I'm just going to write 64 because I know that remember I have to do my exponents before I do my multiplication. So when I do my multiplication, I'm going to say 2 times 3.14 times 64. So let's see, 2 times 3.14 times 8 times 22 equals. And I have 1105.28. I'm not rounding. And then I'm going to say 2 times 3.14 times 64. And I get 401.92. And now I want to go ahead and add these two numbers together. So 401.92 plus 1105.28 equals, and I get 1,507.2, and since my unit is centimeters, centimeters squared. Circle my answer. Okay, moving on. Try this one on your own, and then we'll look at it in class. Volume. Volume I feel as though is a bit more simpler than surface area is, only because you're not doing as many steps. All right, so we're trying to figure out the cubic units. So we're trying to figure out how much goes into the soup can, how much you can put in the Pringles container, how much cereal can fit into the cereal box. So when we want to figure out volume of an object, we say length times width times height. Multiply those numbers together. That's it. So it's a bit simpler. Here we have the rectangular prism again. I want to label my length, my width, my height. And now I'm going to go ahead and say 15 times 5 times 10. And I go ahead and multiply those numbers together. And I get 750 centimeters cubed. We're talking about cubic volume right now. We're talking about volume. Whenever we say volume, we're cubing it. Okay, try this one on your own. Let's talk about volume of a cylinder. The formula for volume of a cylinder is pi r squared h. So in order to solve it, use 3.14 for pi, plug in the numbers. Of course, you have to square your radius, and then multiply going straight across. So let's see. Here I have my radius of 8, my height of 22. I'm going to say 3.14 times. Now with decimals and stuff, I feel as though it's okay to sometimes use the times symbol, times 8 squared. That way our times signs and our decimals don't get confused. Times 8 squared times 22. Now remember 8 squared is 64. So now I'm just going to multiply straight across. 3.14 times 64 times 22. And I have 4,421.12 centimeters cubed. All right, try this last one on your own. And when we get back to class, we'll go ahead and discuss our answers. Thank you.